Hi and welcome. I'm Steve Martirano, and this is the Behavioral Corner. You're invited to hang with us as we discuss the ways we live today, the choices we make, the things we do, and how they affect our health and well-being. So you're on the corner, the Behavioral Corner. Please hang around a while.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome again to Behavioral Corner. It's me, hanging, Steve Martirano, on the corner, as I often do here, waiting for somebody interesting to come by. And I'm so lucky I picked this corner because I just bump into the greatest people. Even the guy who runs the bodega around the corner is just the best. So it's the Behavioral Corner. We talk about behavioral health. So I tell people this is a podcast about everything because that's what behavioral health is. It's the decisions we make, how that affects us emotionally and physically, even spiritually. So we range far and wide here on the Behavioral Corner. And it's all made possible by our great partners, our underwriters, Retreat Behavioral Health. You'll hear about them a little bit later. So, you want to talk to people in a situation like this that really knows what they're talking about. I mean, obviously, you don't want to have the wrong people talking about something they know nothing about. So we reach out and we get experts. We get people that really know what they're talking about. And that is often, people with academic degrees and backgrounds in science or history or whatever. We're going to talk about kids today, okay? We're going to talk about kids today. There's certainly a lot of professionals in the field of child psychology and child guidance, but I want to get a real professional to talk about kids, and that's a father or a parent, I should say, a dad. And I could do no better than this guest because I've been trying to get this guy for a while. Brian Hayes joins us on the Behavioral Corner. He is with our underwriting partners, Retreat Behavioral Health. But again, if he joins us as the dad of four, count them, four young guys whose exploits I've been following through Facebook for the past year or so, and I'm delighted by them. Brian's here to help us understand his relationship with his sons and their relationship with competition. Look, it's never been easy to be a parent. First of all, hi, Brian. How are you?
How you doing? Great.
Thanks so much for your time. Let me set this up by saying, it's just never been easy to be a parent. I guess, 300 years ago, when children were born, it was obviously a different deal. The idea of parenting was to get them strong enough so they could go out and work in the fields. I mean, that was pretty much it. That was the end of rearing. Can he get behind a plow? Can she churn butter or, do stuff?
Things have changed a little bit since then.
Things have changed a little bit. So I don't want to sit here and say this is the hardest time ever to raise children, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out the obvious, that this is a unique time to be both a parent and a kid. There are situations and factors impacting both parents and their children currently going on that are extraordinary. They result in all kinds of sometimes benefits, but very often they can result in fear and danger. I mean, the pandemic is only the most obvious example of what this generation of young children and their parents have had to deal with. So we understand this is a unique time in history and a unique moment. And we're going to take a look at it in general, but in particular, kids and competition. And Brian knows a lot about competition. Let's begin a little bit with your background. Where were you born and raised?
So I was born in San Diego, West Coast, California, and I was a military brat. So my father was in the Navy, and every 2 to 3 years we were packing up and moving to a brand new location. I was born in Southern California. My brother was born in Biloxi, Mississippi, and my sister was born in Long Island, New York. And we're all 3 years apart. So we did a lot of moving around. Where am I from? Right now, Florida, I guess you could say, because I did a lot of bouncing around. But originally, I started my journey born in San Diego.
And how old are you?
39. I had to think about that for a second. 39.
39. Look what's looming.
Yeah.
The big 4-0. Trust me when I tell you, as a guy who's 150 years old,
yeah,
40's not. Forget about 40. It's meaningless. Blow right past 40.
Meaningless. Yeah, I'm trying not to look at 40. If I'm at an age now, if if I sneeze the wrong way, I could be out of commission for a couple of days because things start to hurt. You know what I mean? It's an interesting chapter.
Oh man, you're in the prime. You're in the shank of the evening, as we say.
Yeah.
How? Tell me about the boys. As I said, 4 sons. What are their ages and names?
So 4 sons. My oldest son, his name is Colin, and he's 11 years old. My second son is Declan. He is 9. My third son is Casey. He is 7, and my youngest son is Dempsey, and he is 5.
Wow.
Fun time.
Wow. So every couple of years.
Every couple of years.
Every couple of years.
It just not that way.
You were also, I know a little bit about your background. You were also an elite athlete during your high school and college career, correct?
Correct. Yeah, my main sport growing up, I bounced around and did a lot of different sports, but it finally stuck when I found the sport of wrestling, and I wore that hat as a wrestler throughout my college career, and then many years after that, I stayed in coaching and even got to the point where I had my sons wrestling. So yeah, I've learned a lot about myself through competition, and now with 4 boys, all at different ages, at different developmental stages of competition, I'm learning even more.
Yeah, I'll bet. So before we get into them and your relationship with them in competition, when did you recognize you enjoyed competing? Because obviously you did. And do you think you were born with that desire to compete, or was that instilled in you by maybe your father or your mother?
It was instilled for sure. Through that exposure, I realized that I enjoyed competition when I was winning. There was that positive reinforcement. I think I really started in Pop Warner football. Believe it or not, now I'm 5'7" on a good day, kind of sitting around 200 pounds. But at the time, a Filipino kid running around being one of the biggest guys on the football field wasn't something that was really heard of. So I started to experience the successes there, and I enjoyed that. It became part of my identity, and part of the expectations too of competing.
Yeah. You can see that in any. And by the way, we're talking about competition. We'll talk about it primarily in a physical context, because right. Brian, as he just said, was a wrestler. That's certainly a physical sport, and his boys are in a very physical activity. If you haven't seen any BMX competition, it's breathtaking. And these are not, big guys; these are young kids. Right. But competition is competition, and I've seen this in my children and my grandchildren now, and that when they see they're good at something, nothing motivates a kid more than, wow, I'm good. I can do this, right?
Absolutely.
How do you find that? How did you find in your children that they would respond to something like that? In other words, how did you introduce them to the idea of competition?
So part of that comes from my upbringing and my exposure, and kind of the things that I hold near and dear to my heart, and what I hoped my sons could take as well. And my wife, also being a competitive person, we got our children involved in physical activities very, very early on. My first son, he was doing swim lessons at 6 months. Actually, I think it might have even been before that. So everything was really about exposure. And myself being an active individual, my wife being an active individual, we wanted to do anything and everything that we could do outdoors, getting the body moving, because we recognize the benefits of that. And working at Retreat Behavioral Health as for a long time, the recreational therapist, I see the benefits of that. You just can't deny the benefits of being physical. And so we started them all at a very, very young age. As soon as they could kind of really get moving, whatever was appropriate for that stage of physical development, we went for it. We nurtured that, from throwing, from running, from being on a scooter or a balance bike, and then just, kind of rolling with the punches, if you will. Mm-hmm. But yeah, right out the gate, we were looking to get them physically active.
Yeah, because you're active lifestyle people, and you like that lifestyle. Naturally, you would bring your children along with that. When though do you begin to go, and they take to it, right? They love it. They take to it. When do you begin to go, I'll bet you they'd like to engage in competition because it's different. Go hiking with your parents or canoeing with your parents, and then saying, okay, here's Little League Baseball. There's all this stuff. When did you make that decision?
So again, we made that early on. So when you talk about the physicality of doing something outdoors like kayaking is very different than the exposure to sports. So we came into being parents with the idea, my wife, competing collegiate sports and myself. So as we were kind of looking for ways to keep them active, sports was always right there at the forefront of our mind. So, it wasn't so much that we reflected and thought about, when would they be interested in competing? It was really more just kind of throwing them into it, if you will, because that's what we knew, right? So I talked about my competitive nature being instilled in me through exposure. So as soon as we could get them into sports, it was karate, and then it was wrestling. The earliest you could wrestle was 5 years old. So as soon as my oldest hit 5, we got him on the wrestling mat, and because of that sport, you don't just go wrestle to practice. Like, you sign up as a 5-year-old, you are wrestling in a tournament with tons of other kids on the weekends, So
at 5, at 5 years of age?
5 years of age. Yeah. My youngest son, we snuck on the wrestling mat. My younger 2, we snuck on the wrestling mat right around 3. My family, my father, my brother, and I, we were heavy into in the sport of wrestling. So my oldest 2, even when before they could even walk, I had them crawling around on a wrestling mat, which is kind of, for people that know wrestling, is probably not, a lot of people didn't think it was the best choice because those mats are kind of grimy, but I wanted that exposure. So they were around it very early on.
Yeah. How did they, I know how they took to it, but what were you looking for there? I know it didn't or did it happen? Did one of them or 2 of them go, this isn't for me? Does that happen?
It did. And I'm going to be honest with you, Steve, BMX is a beautiful, beautiful sport. It's an amazing community. Our family has truly grown to love it. But at first, I was devastated. My garage down here in Florida, you know the ages of my sons, but I had a wrestling mat, we had weights, we had resistance bands, we had a treadmill, we had all of that stuff. And, I would work with the boys, they'd lace up, they'd have their headgear on, and they'd be wrestling. And then we happened to find this 6-week program that was very, very inexpensive. It was reasonable for all 4 of my kids. And I was like, we'll never find anything like that. Just send them, go. And then they fell in love with the sport of BMX. And then they didn't want to wrestle anymore. And up until that point, that's all that this family knew, So
right.
I remember being in the garage, cutting up my wrestling mat, like crying. I was in tears. I'm like, I can't believe my guys don't want to wrestle. What's going on here? So there's been a lot of self-discovery and kind of figuring things out for all of us, really.
Well, that's one of the great things to talk about here, because a lot of parents face that. They have an idea in their head of what their kid can do or should do. And then one day they find out that they're not as interested in that as mom and dad.
Right.
They just figure out what they want. So what's harder in a situation like that for a parent? Managing their expectations or managing your expectations?
Whew. Oh man. So being that I have, the 4 boys and we started them out really, really young, the expectations that I had, I'm going to start speaking about my own personal expectations.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted them to have that exposure, and I wanted for them to begin to develop as individuals, because there's something about sports, that life experiences that you can really only gain in the arena of competition. I lost my train of thought there. I kind of got.
Well, you obviously.
I'm going in a bunch of different directions here.
You obviously pivoted. You were able to go, okay.
Yeah.
I started out thinking they would be wrestling prodigies. That's not really what I wanted. I wanted them to understand what competition's benefits were.
Yeah. So if I look at, I don't recall this now. If I look back at the concept of expectations in competition. So the way that I started it off, and I'm going to stick with BMX from here on out because that's
okay. Yep.
It's not an inexpensive sport. So my wife and I, we invested a lot of money for our children to be able to compete on this platform. And the expectations that I started them all out with was, if we're going to commit to this financially and, with our time and all of our resources and energy, then I expect that you are going to give everything that you've got 100%. And I expect that all the time. And I'm learning now that, 100% is different for them on different days, and it'll appear different to me. But what happened was, through the expectations of dad and, oh, it's important that we win, it's important that we go hard, that kind of set the baseline. And now I'm at a place where I don't have to go in, if you will, on my boys and have these conversations repeatedly over and over again about the expectation of performing well and performing at your best, because they've kind of gathered that and taken that on as their own. So we kind of established this foundation of excelling and success and working hard and putting in what you'll get what you put in. And believe it or not, it's a beautiful thing that's already transitioning to, they now have developed their own expectations of, hey, I'm one of the top riders in Florida. I've got to show up and I've got to perform.
That can be a tough one for a youngster. Absolutely. To understand, because I hear you're saying to them, you're making a kind of an adult argument here. You're saying, look, this is not inexpensive. It's tremendously time consuming for mom and dad. And if you're going to just futz around here, tell me now, because you'll save me a lot of time and money. Yeah. Now, that can put a kid under a kind of pressure going, yeah, gee, they bought these bikes. And, they're driving us at 6 o'clock in the morning. And how do you avoid putting not no pressure, but too much pressure on a youngster?
That's something that I've learned through the sport of BMX. How do you avoid it? You really have to be able to gauge as a parent, as a father, as a mother, and really understand your children and know when to ease up and know when to apply a little bit of pressure, because I do think pressure is good for kids. I mean, that if we're being honest, that's the world that we live in, right? A competitive world. And pressure is everywhere. So I do not by any means try to shelter my children from that. I apply the pressure, but I've also been a coach, right? And I've had coaches. I was a college athlete, and then I, coached a bunch of different kids and different schools and teams, so I've developed over the years an understanding of, all right, now it's time to capitalize, add a little pressure, push. Now it's time to ease up. And I've been able to do that and kind of provide that environment for my children. And knock on wood, so far, it's actually been working out pretty well. There have been tears, there's been, really hard conversations to have, but as long as you're understanding where your child is at. And if I can, I actually like to go into one of personal experience. My 9-year-old is he's one of my strongest performing riders, right? And there are 3 levels. So you start off as a novice, then you move to intermediate, and then you're an expert. I was told that it took years to be expert. And it kind of happened within the first year for 3 of my sons. So they went 10 wins as a novice, and then they moved up to the next intermediate level, and they were getting their clocks cleaned. And my son said, I don't want to race anymore. And I applied a little bit of pressure, and I said, listen, we set out to do this. The goal was to get to expert. We're going to finish. And if you don't want to race after you're an expert, then you don't have to. But we are going to finish what we started. And that's the goal that we had, like, let's get him to expert. So when he got to intermediate, the expectations that I had on him, I was still kind of pushing. And then he got to the point where he just didn't want to race, and he was racing even worse. And then I realized that pressure was too much. And for him, he couldn't handle it the way that my other sons could. So I recognized that, and I said, you know what, for the next month, Daddy's not going to say anything to you. I just want you to go out there and ride and try this. Just try this. Give yourself a personal goal, and every week I want you to work for it. Try to get your lap time under 50 seconds, under 51 seconds, whatever it was at the time. And then when the pressure was lifted, they moved into another level of competition. And there's a lot of that give and play in the development and the personal growth as an athlete, as an individual.
That's a deep insight, because I think too many parents can't step outside their expectations and go, well, what's that kid thinking? So maybe I'm putting a little too much pressure. Maybe I back off. That's a key point. Brian Hayes is our guest. Brian is here as an expert in raising 4 sons between the ages of 5 and 11. They all compete. They all seem to love it. Some of them are competing. A couple of them are competing at a very high level in bicycle motocross. And he's here to tell us what he's learned about handling that. I don't know how it is, and I'm sure it's not as bad in something like BMX. I don't know, but we've all witnessed horrible scenes of parents behaving like maniacs during youth competitions. How have you avoided that? It's called toxic levels of involvement. Are you aware that that's a slippery slope that you could slide down if you're not careful?
Absolutely, 100%. And one of the things that I could say about the BMX sport in the community, while there are those levels of competition, what I've learned, and I think working in this field has really made me aware and able to kind of dissect different situations, is I've learned that there are certain individuals that are almost continuing to compete through their children. And that's where I think that toxicity comes into play. If the focus is solely on the performance and the growth and the personal development and the enjoyment of your child, then you can really do no wrong, I think, if you're supporting that. But when you get into this is us, we've done this. No, we didn't do it. Those kids did it. You provided the vessel, and the kids are the ones that are performing. You got to step the hell back and just let them be kids. And I think you can avoid that toxicity, because what happens is, I'll talk about dads. Dads begin to butt heads because, your son did this, your son did that. Why are you feeling attacked? Why are you feeling, because it hits something with your need for competition. The reality of the situation is, you kind of go back to the children, you talk about it with them. What did they experience? How were they processing it? And then offer them a solution if they ask, this is a way that you could solve this problem with the other rider. Dad doesn't need to get involved, or shouldn't have to get involved, if everyone kind of maintain this healthy balance of competition. But to your point, the toxic level of competition can be very, very, very dark. And the way that I've avoided that is I've had my father, who was kind of my coach, and he was an athlete, and he still is a coach, talk to me about certain situations. And I've had my wife, highlight, hey, why are you getting so fired up?
Lighten up, okay?
Yeah. And I did realize, it in myself. I'm like, I'm pushing these kids to compete the way that I would, and that's not what it's about. That's
there's some of the obvious or not so obvious benefits of getting your kids involved in competition. There's a list of benefits, obviously, to them, but as an adult, you can always learn something about yourself. When you're dealing in a situation like this. Before I get into some other specific things, because if you go online, as I have in the past couple of days looking at this, and put in kids in competition, you will get 2 kinds of responses from Google. One will be lists of benefits, and the other will be the dangers of competition. So there is 2 sides to the issue of competition. We're here to talk about managing that and making sure you're mostly on the positive side of this thing. But here's what I'm fascinated about, and I wonder what your impression of this is. A parent who's looking at a child who is maybe good at something, perhaps even gifted at it, has to make a choice there. And often that choice occurs at a very early age without a lot of information. There's a sense, my kid may be a chess wizard, or my kid may be able to, play football. You've got to make a decision there about what to do. And I am always struck by the idea of, if Earl Woods, Tiger's father, decided to give him a violin because maybe he could be a virtuoso violinist, or a basketball or a baseball, he would have missed the great gift the kid had from God knows where. Then Earl Woods did something that I think I want you to talk about. When it became apparent that he did have a gift and was going to be Tiger Woods. And Tiger sort of forced the issue, said, okay, thank you for everything, but I got this. And Earl backed off.
Yeah.
Too many parents aren't able to make that decision, are they?
No, they aren't. And I think you got to circle back to kind of checking your ego and what is this really all about? Looking at the purpose of competition and kind of having that outlined before getting into it. Looking at the abilities and the gifts that I think all of us are given, some at different levels. It really does have to kind of dial back, and you have to, again, go back into that coaching situation. We're like, okay, I know to apply a little bit of pressure here, but at the end of the day, I'm really learning now that you kind of have to, I think the healthier thing to do is allow that child to come to that conclusion on their own. And
you got to walk that line between not letting them give up on something they might truly be great at and enjoy because maybe they had a weekend when they're bored, or on the other hand, pushing them in some direction they just don't want to go in. That leads me to this question of burnout.
Yeah.
We've seen some very gifted young people hit a wall at a very early age. You worry about that for your kids?
I am. The only reason I worry about the burnout is because I know that I'm going to miss this chapter when it's over. I've really kind of switched my perspective, and I've really gotten to the point where I enjoy the journey of the experience. And I'm not so hyper focused on the overall performance at this stage. I personally am taking many layers of the pressure and the expectations away, because burnout is a very real thing in the sports that I competed in. There were some of the phenomenal first grade wrestlers that were state New England champions or whatever, national champions. By the time they got to high school, they were done. Could it have been something that got them a college scholarship? Maybe. I think when you get to that stage, my father coaches a lot of cross-country runners, indoor and outdoor track runners. And there have been times where people just kind of stepped away from it. And this is money, this is college, this is your education,
yes,
your tuition. Again, you kind of have to bring it back. And I know it's tough as a parent, because as parents, we provide those resources to give our children higher levels of education. But they have to understand the consequences, and you got to let go of your own stuff and give them more freedom. And I think that freedom allows for the real, true, authentic development of who those people are. Your children.
Yeah. It's a great point.
It's tough.
The reason it resonates so much right now is that I think the process you're talking about begins at a very early age. And you know how this works. You were a product of this. As youngsters rise in their level of expertise in whatever they're doing, whether it's chess or football, the herd is culled. The better kids keep moving up. That's just the way it works. And each level they achieve, there is a bit more pressure because the competition is stiffer. Then they reach the absolute elite level you just mentioned. It's at that level that it goes quite beyond merely competing for a place on the team or a ranking as a chess player. It's about money, lots and lots of money. Right. And what we're seeing now, and comment on this if you will, are professional athletes who for the first time, at least in my experience, are standing up and saying, I'm getting crushed here emotionally. I've got mental health issues. And everybody goes, come on, man, you play a game, you're making money, man up. Yeah. That's the worst thing we could be doing to elite athletes and young people, isn't it?
I would agree. I think there goes those expectations again, right? And not the respect for an individual to kind of make the choices that they want to make. And it becomes very hard, as an athlete, you have a team that relies on you. You have coaches that have these expectations, and you have family members that have these expectations. And I really do believe that it's a beautiful thing, and the world of sports is evolving because there's more discussion about mental health, and there's more discussion about all the other elements of competition besides just getting that W, that check, or whatever it might be. So yeah, no, it's moving in the right direction, and I think it's a beautiful thing to kind of see athletes stand up for their own internal voice, their own mental, emotional, and physical well-being.
Well, Brian, I knew when we asked you to do this that you were going to be a strong advocate for the benefits of competition, and I agree with you that kids can learn a lot.
Right.
Just these last two things. There's a movement. There was, I guess it still is, that says, this is wrong. Competition is not something kids should be involved in right away. They should be involved in the activity, but everybody should get a trophy. The everybody should get a trophy theory for involvement rather than expertise. Let me guess. You're not everybody gets a trophy kind of guy, are you?
Well, I could paint the picture like this. I've got my 5-year-old that races BMX, and he started riding at 3.5, and he moved up to intermediate. He got his first 10 wins, and then he came to me and he said, Daddy, I got 3rd place. Can I get a trophy? And I said, son, we get trophies for 1st place. So I think that answers the question. I don't believe in participation trophies. It levels the playing field in a way that's just not realistic. That's just not the real world. If everyone got a participation trophy, then, I mean, we were creating this population of people that kind of have this level of entitlement. And I think that can go down a road of causing and creating more toxicity in your life and more challenges, as opposed to getting those kind of hard lessons early on, and acceptance and redirection, and figuring out what is your route, your path. What are you good at? So the participation trophies, I'm not the biggest fan of.
Yeah, I think sometimes that they were an effort of the parents not to make sure that they didn't feel bad at the end of Little League season. If everybody got a trophy, then you could bring one home as well. Finally, just this point: too many people, I think, believe there is a conflict between competition and cooperation, because it seems like, well, you're always banging heads and trying to defeat an adversary. But you wrestled in an individual sport, but there was a team involved in this. They are not mutually exclusive. You can be competitive and learn about that as well as how to cooperate in the context that we're talking about. Do you believe that?
I 100% believe that. The collaboration component, I think, is a major, major advantage in the world of competition, right? So I've always sought out individual sports for my sons because I valued the sport of wrestling and how the spotlight was on you. And I think that was an important thing. There were no people to blame. What you put in is what you got. And I think that's an important life lesson that you can gather through athletics and competition. However, the collaboration component and cooperation, as you said, you can still, like you mentioned, you can still compete on your own, but then there's a collaboration of coaching, of being able to take direction, of being able to take advice, and looking at other athletes and reaching out, building that relationship. I see my boys, they ride, I've got my oldest is an 11-year-old, and I've got my older 2 that are chasing the 16-year-old Colombian riders that are unbelievably lightning fast. So they've made those connections, and one of my sons is learning Spanish because a rider is
right.
Has that language barrier. But that collaboration is so important. And I think you can find it through individualized sports because you still need to develop, right?
Absolutely. There's so many false choices here in this, and too many people, I think, are taking the easy way out. I think competition, as you said at the beginning, if you know your kid, you're going to know what level they're at and where they want to go, and you can enjoy it with them as well. Brian Hayes and his 4 sons, Incidentally, you're going to hear about these kids. I'm telling you, I've been trying to sign them up to my personal management contract. Yeah. I can't get any traction. They're great. They look. I haven't met them yet. They look like great kids. I'm sure they are. Brian, thanks so much for your time. This is a great topic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of fun talking. So you'll come back sometime and bring the boys next time. That'd be great.
All right. It's going to be significantly louder. We might have a hard time communicating, but I'm more than happy to do so.
Brian Hayes from Retreat Behavioral Health. Thank you, Brian. Thank you all. Don't forget to follow us on all those places where you can follow us. Like us at Facebook. We appreciate that. And you can also drop us a line. Let us know what you think of the Behavioral Corner. We'll be back at you real soon. Peace out.
Retreat Behavioral Health has proudly been serving the community for over 10 years. Here at Retreat, we believe in the power of connection and quality care. We offer comprehensive, holistic, and compassionate treatment from industry-leading experts. Call 855-802-6600 or visit us at www.retreatbehavioralhealth.com to begin your journey today.
That's it for now. And make us a habit, hanging out at the Behavioral Corner. And when we're not hanging, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter on the Behavioral Corner.